You, my friends, are just in time to Take a Shift, a revolutionary podcast hosted weekly by yours truly, Belinda and Catherine, that will literally alter the trajectory of your life.
We're on a mission to listen, ignite, and transform, challenging ourselves and you, dear listener, to journey deeper and get uncomfortable. Discover what lies beyond those layers of fear, judgment, smallness, and everything else that's been getting in your way up until now. Choose to step into new possibilities and courageously wake up to the life you know you were meant to be living.
So buckle up, Buttercup, summon your curiosity, and together, let's take a shift.
Hi, everybody. So glad you're here. It's Belinda Zilberman with my soul sister and best friend, Catherine Hart. We're so excited that you're joining us for our second podcast. And today we're going to be exploring this idea of the space between us. As we mentioned in our last podcast, we go deep, we go far, we go into all areas of what we're thinking about, what we're feeling about, what we're exploring. So this idea of the space between us is going to be the theme for today. And Catherine, I'm sure that our listeners are like, what? What are they going to be talking about? What does this mean, the space between us? So why don't you take it away and start talking about that?
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite and worst lessons ever. And so I just did a speech last week in my Toastmasters group, and it was titled The Space Between Us because it's so prominent. And I'm going to share my experience right off the bat of how I came to this, because this is something that's in my book, and it's one of the biggest tools, awareness tools, consciousness tools that I have up until now in my fifth decade of life. And so I'll tell you, I was having a horrible issue with an ex. It was over a legal matter, a home that we owned together, and things were being dragged out. Things were not going as planned, and I was getting frustrated with it. I was trying to give a lot of grace and give a lot of space and have that worked out more organically than not, more organically than forced, I should say. And, like, there was time that needed to elapse for several things to happen. And, it had to do with some money, a lot of money. Some of my retirement money had to do with my name on the mortgage, and I'd moved out of the house, and it was just getting frustrating. And so we had a date that things were supposed to close and happen, and that date came, and that moment passed. And at that moment, like, I was so angry. Like we were supposed to meet at the bank at 4:30, and I was so angry. I can't even tell you how angry I was. I was probably the maddest, most angriest, frustrated I've ever been in a situation like that. And so I just let out a barrage of texts and thoughts, and I was nasty. I was angry. I was like, you're not doing what you said. It was not pretty. It was not pretty. And there was a lot of toxic shit, for lack of a better word. Like, it just was nasty. And we all know I have anger in my background. So I leaned into that, and that's how I was in this situation. And I remember that being either a Thursday or Friday. And I woke up the next morning, and I literally physically could not move. Like, I could not even brush my teeth, because just that small range of motion would cripple me. My back would spasm, and I would be crippled. And I couldn't even get off a couch. My back's been sore before, but I've never had back problems. And so I was like, what is going on? And then I was like, holy crap. This is all of that toxic crap that I spewed onto this person. And I've just bathed my entire self into it. And that's when I came into the realization that what I did to her, I really did to myself, on an emotional, on a spiritual, on a mental and on a physical level. Like it was like I'm in anesthesia. That's what I do. All I could see was all of my CSF, all of my nerve endings bathed in all this toxic crap that I had just spewed toward her. Because I had the right to do so, right? Because she wasn't doing her part and coming up with what she gave me her word on certain things. So of course I had the right, right? I had the right to do this. So like that was such a revelation for me. And I'm telling you, it took a couple of days to really, I mean, Advil wouldn't touch it. Thankfully somebody traded, I was supposed to work that night, and thankfully somebody traded the shift with me. But it took me a couple of days to really walk. Seriously. Now, when I tell you that, you may not believe that, but like I had trouble even brushing my teeth. And that's how much toxic spew I threw in her direction. And that's when I really got one of my most amazing gifts that came back to me. Like I could almost cry just talking about it, because like it that's when I really realized the space between you and me is what I fill that space with is not so much what I do to you, it's what I do to me. And what I give to you is not really what I give to you, it's what I give to me. So that was last October, I think, and that has revolutionized, transformed, transmuted my entire existence. Like even in traffic anymore, if you're sitting in traffic, filling that space between you and traffic, and with that frustration, anger, finger in your neighbor driver, whatever you do, which I can't say that I've ever done that. Because I drive slow.
Not us.
Yeah, us. But if you're filling that space between you and any person, any event, any set of circumstances, any fear, anything you fill that space between you and it is what you do to yourself. And I have never had a back problem since then, other than if I get sore, if I'm on my bike or whatever. But I have never had a back issue since then. And I didn't really have one before then. I mean, I can move furniture. I'm 54 years old. I can move furniture. I can still, like, whatever. I can be on my feet for 12 hours a day. I'm not saying it's not sore and I'm not a little tender, but, I have never not been able to brush my teeth, never not been able to get off a couch. But that was exactly the toxins that I spewed in that space between me and that situation, that person. And nothing has ever been so clear to me, to where I woke, girl. I mean, I woke straight up. It hit me laying in bed. I was like, holy crap. This is exactly all of those toxins that I gave away because I thought I had the right to, and they have come right back to bathe me in them.
Well, and it's just such a powerful message that I think, for anyone, including myself, I've had a similar numerous experiences where you get a physical ailment, something in your physical body that just knocks you down, right? Brings you to your knees, lays you out in bed and you just can't get out. And that, when we have a context to consider what's gotten us there, especially when it's like there's no reason, right? How many times have we been like, well, I didn't work in the garden, or I didn't strain my back or my knee or my this or my that, and it's sort of like I don't know what's going on. And I think a lot of us, and I think for a lot of my life, I walked around like I don't understand why this is happening. But I remember probably like the first time that I had this kind of experience was when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And I remember I was probably 21. It was probably about a year before he died, maybe even closer to 6 months. And I was having terrible stomach and bowel pain. And they did a colonoscopy and I was fine. And I remember thinking at that time, oh gosh, they must think that I'm a hypochondriac, but I was in a lot of pain. And I had this feeling back then that I was like, I am so stressed out. I'm 21 years old. My father's about to pass away. My mom moved out of the country. My sister and I are not really in close relationship, and I'm physically like in this pain. I remember having that kind of thought in that moment of like, this has got to be connected to all this stress, this worry, this fear. I didn't have a context for it. I didn't have anyone around me saying, and if somebody had said, oh, this is all in your head, it's all emotional or it's all mental or whatever, I probably would have gotten really quite angry because it was physical. Like I was in physical pain. And I remember with my dad's passing, it disappeared. Like it was gone within maybe even the day. And around that time, again in my early 20s, somehow, grace of God, I received the book, the Louise Hay book, the You Can Heal Your Life.
Yeah.
And I remember I never read the whole thing. I just went right to the back. And in the back of that book, you have all of those, you've got the ailments, and then you've got the unexpressed emotional experience connected to them. And I remembered going in, and it was like every ailment or everything that I had ever had, I was reading, like I couldn't get enough of it. And from that moment on, it became clear to me that our physical body is sending us messages all the time. And when we're not aligned, as you were just talking, with our emotions, with a sense of personal responsibility for what we're putting out in the world, what we're communicating, what we're receiving, and what we're giving back, our body will let us know in some shape or form. And sometimes the message is really loud. And for those messages, I'm super grateful, because it's like you can't not pay attention, and I pray to have those kinds of messages versus the subtle ones, because I'm not very good with the subtle messages. I can ignore those for decades, right? But those big ones, it's like you cannot ignore it. So, I mean, I'm curious then, like your experience with this toxicity that you talk about, and it's such a good word, right? Because yeah, I can feel it when you say that toxicity. How would you say it infused into the rest of your life? Like, how did something change on a daily basis after you had this conversation?
Well, I mean, it had been infusing in my life for the last year and leading up to that. And you talk about these subtle messages. And one of the great visuals I have is like, universe, God, spirit gets our attention in one of three ways. Somebody explained this, or I've read this somewhere, where the first one is a butterfly lands upon your head and you notice a butterfly and something's trying to get your attention, right? Like it lands upon your cheek and you're like, oh, okay.
And then you flick it off.
And you flick that off and you go on. And then the second way is you see more red flags or things as Ron used to say, follow the emotions, follow the feeling down, because underneath that is where you really got to do your work. And so the second way is you keep having these feelings, let's talk about toxicity. I get mad, I get irritated, I get frustrated, and I sit in that frustration and I sit in that hatefulness at times, because you hate the situation and then you want to hate the person, because that's where we want to direct it. You're taking a person that's doing something to you, an ex, a child, whatever it is, and then you get hit by a 2x4 across your forehead. And sometimes that doesn't get our attention. Like, we know we've been hit, we know we're in this negative toxic space. We're like, but it's everybody else's fault, it's everything else going on in my life. Can you believe that, they billed me for this? Can you believe all this traffic? Can you believe my work assignment? Can you believe whatever? Put in whatever you want. But what's happening is you are being hit over the forehead with your 2x4 because your butterfly is long gone. If you were awake enough to turn around and see the road behind you, it would look like an entire flare set has gone off from the red flags that has been upon you that you have been asleep to. So then what happens, we've had two chances, the sweet little butterfly landing upon our cheek that we, flip off. And then the 2x4 over our forehead, and that still doesn't get our attention. We don't really connect the dots. We don't really correspond to it. We don't wake up to it and change the way we're reacting to it. It's not so much that the situation has to change. The way we react to it has to be the change. Because I'll tell you, my situation is still not fully resolved. But do I feed this thing any more toxicity? I send this thing love and grace, and I have been in a love and grace space. No matter how hard that muscle is to flex, I send this thing love and grace. And it's come a little ways. It's moved a little ways. Half of the money's been paid, half of this, but I send this love and grace. Mm-hmm. And so if we're not awake by the 2x4 slapping us across the forehead, the next thing's a full-on freight train, because that light at the end of that tunnel to wake you up, get your attention, is a freight train. And then that's when the devastation really sets in. It's a full-on annihilation. That's when you unload all of your guns, like I did that day, spewing all that venom and that hate, and all that frustration, and that year of built up anger, resentment, frustration on something that should have been done wasn't. And did I have a right to, as we would say in quote society? Yeah, because I even had a legal agreement this was to be handled 10 months before that. Mm-hmm. So did I have a right? Okay, you could say, yeah, you had a right to do that. Did it help me? No. Did it wake me and shake me? Yes, because I couldn't brush my teeth. And I'm a pretty healthy person. So I really think that, and I know this, the body is a late manifester of what we have had in our mind, our thoughts, our hearts, and our soul. The body will manifest that late. I see it every day at work when I go do my pre-op assessment before I put somebody to sleep. They can talk about their heart condition, and then they talk about how they hate certain things. Well, okay, that may be why you have a heart condition. Eastern medicine is way ahead of us on this, then, because we can't spew these things and fill this space between us and anything and not expect at a completely cellular level for it not to come back to us. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even talking about the soul level, the mental level, the entire space between us and you can think about, this just came to me as we're talking, the space between us and it, the way I'm reacting to it on my mental level, on my soul level, on my spiritual level, on my God level, on my prayer level, and then my body level, because the body will manifest it. If we don't heal it, the body will manifest it. I see that every day. We have research and scientific research now. It's coming on fast and furious with that. And it's just amazing. Dr. David Hawkins, who was on my bookshelf, just like Louise Hay's How to Heal Your Body, was on your bookshelf, who was a medically trained MD doctor. And he talks about where we vibrate at. If we vibrate in hate vibrates down at like 15. Love vibrates at like 600. God, Buddha, Mother Teresa, unconditional love, 700. So he puts a linear scale on it for us, so to speak, for our linear and egotistical minds, because we want to have everything correlated out. And when we're vibrating down in hopelessness and hate, and we're spewing that toxin, there's really, other than shame, there's no other lower vibration than that. And once I woke up to that, then where did I go? Shame, which was even lower than hate on the vibration scale of consciousness. Because, David Hawkins did the map of consciousness. And, that it's just an amazing revelation and transformative tool that I saw in my life, that anything like we're talking about that you fill that space with, between you and a person, event, or circumstances, or you and yourself, right? Because this is about even us with ourselves.
I would underscore that and say it's really only about us and ourselves. At the end of the day,
Right.
When you say what I put out there comes back to me, when we bring this conversation into that spiritual context we introduced yesterday, right? We're always talking about the spiritual, or rather, before we get to the spiritual, we're talking about the physical, the mental, and the emotional, right? This is where most of us live in this context, trying to figure out our lives through our physical view of reality, our mental thinking around reality, or our emotional body, how we feel about the reality we're in, without that spiritual context, that bigger picture that says, for example, this is all for us, not against us. Everything is here for our learning. This is all part of the process. Uh, uh, Without that, then there's pain and suffering. And this conversation that we're having right now, if we only bring it into that physical and mental world, for example, we're going to have people who would debate us. Like, it's not true. Like, this just happened to me. And right. I mean, this is, sort of, I call it in my book, subtle victimhood, right? This kind of subtle explanation of why things happen to us, and how many people on the planet, including you and me, for a good part of our lives before we started waking up to a different possibility, walked around with like this. And even in the situation you described, same thing with my dad who had cancer, my mom who left, and it was subtle victimhood was all over that. Like, I own that. All I felt was I was the victim in this, not my mom who had lived in an unhappy marriage for 2 decades and wanted to get out, not my dad who had cancer and 6 months to live. I was the victim in this. Like, I didn't care anything that was going on around me. It was like how I was feeling and how I wasn't supported and how I was stressed and how I was 21 years old and about to, be by myself on the planet without parents, basically.
Well, and I think that's a beautiful way to put it, because one thing that uh, we really learned at USM, the University of Santa Monica, was, and we work this all the time between us when we're having our conversations, and you call me, I call you, we're having a bad day, and we go through the explanations, and but really it's just what you said. The truest aspect of that and the most authentic part of that is it really is between us and ourselves. Because if there is an answer that is external, like it has to do with any kind of external answer, it's not the most authentic answer, because the answer is always about ourselves. And you know what I mean by that? Like how we have a conversation and you go, but they, but it, that is not the most authentic of the answer, because it always comes back to ourselves.
Yeah, I this idea that and I can remember this going back to childhood. One of the things I think that can be so frustrating for children is this feeling that we don't have the ability to impact our situation, our environment, right? It's our parents or our teachers. And certainly and I can see this with my daughter and my stepson, who are part of this new generation of children who are more awake. I mean, they're just coming on the planet, and they just get it. They're showing up in a way that is so empowered and so clear and articulate. I think they're experiencing this a lot less, but I can remember as a child, I mean, it was incredibly frustrating because I felt that nothing I said mattered, that nothing I really wanted was heard. I didn't feel understood. And I think for many of us, we take that into adulthood. It's very much about our conditioning, and how then we are in a relationship is going to be a direct result of this feeling that we're not empowered to create the relationships we want, to create the life we want, to create the experience we want, because our whole conditioning was set up from childhood that it was about something outside of us being the conductor of the train, right? The driver of the bus. I didn't experience myself as the driver of a bus as a child. And a big part of my journey into adulthood was, how do I get into that seat? Because we all have the ability, and I do believe that we're all supposed to be driving our own bus. Nobody's supposed to be driving our bus for us. But when we have a frame of mind that it's my boss, or it's my spouse, or it's the economy, or it's my parents, or it's my children that are in control of my life experience, somebody else is driving our bus. And I can remember in my 20s doing some of this personal development work. This was the thing that drove me crazy, and to this day, it's the thing that can be such an interesting trigger for me to notice how important this is for me, but also how, as much as I've worked on it in my life with myself, there's still some stuff in the background that there is some more material. The frustrating thing is when I hear people say, especially the economy, like when I just hear it's the economy and therefore I like all of my little flashes go off. It's like, and it's not because the economy isn't perhaps having an impact, or your spouse and your challenging relationship with your spouse, or a teenage kid, or a physical issue you're having. It's the attitude. And I think this is what you said before. It's not the thing, it's not the person, it's the attitude we're taking when we're having that challenge. And if we're having that challenge and saying, look, I'm having this challenge and it's really hard, or I'm in this relationship and it's really hard, but how I choose to engage with it is the question. Not that I'm going to debate with you or not that it's hard or that it's unfair or all of this. How am I going to rise to the occasion to engage with it in a way where I feel I have the ability to respond to it in an empowered way? And sometimes that can be, I'm going to just pause and not do anything or not say anything. I'm going to reflect. I'm going to consider. Sometimes it may mean I need to speak my truth here, and it's going to be super uncomfortable, right? Sometimes it may mean the end of a relationship, or leaving the job, or getting yourself to the hospital. I've done this a few times, just checking to make sure I wasn't having a heart attack, right? And it was fine. But what the action that we're going to take at that point is sort of the less important thing. The more important thing is, how do I feel, whether I'm having a great day or a terrible day, about my ability to direct my life, my ability to be the driver of my bus. And that is really about that spiritual context, right? Coming from a place of, I'm a soul having a human experience, I'm a soul using a human experience. I am a soul first and foremost, and that's love. I'm a soul, and it's pure, and it's like a blank slate, I guess I like to think of it. And then my human experience is what's going to inform that soul's experience. And I think that is really what you're getting at here, Kathy, by talking about this subject and getting excited about it and having us talk about this space between us. It's like, what are the little steps that we can take literally on a day by day basis to reinforce this idea that we are driving our bus, we are in the driver's seat, and that our life is very much a product of our attitude about how we see our life. Does that make
Exactly.
sense?
Of course, beautifully put. And nothing ever, like when you're working with clients, when I'm working with clients, nothing ever really starts shifting until that client sits into that driver's seat of their own bus, as you have put it, and starts taking ownership for the bus. So, because clients will spend hundreds or thousands of dollars, as I have in my 30s and working through, when I wanted to blame it on everything but me, because it was too much to blame it on me, because I had all this right to blame it on everything else. But the real work doesn't ever start until you butt in driver's chair and start taking the ownership. And beyond that, you're just spinning your wheels, because until you take that ownership of this may be my circumstances, this may be the man or woman I'm married to and they're horrible, or this may be the job I'm in and the assignments I get. But until you say, okay, it's mine, and what am I here to learn from it? And then you talk about responding. I call it reacting, because how we react or how we respond to it is everything.
Mm.
But until we do take that ownership of it and get that butt in the chair of our own seat, because you've given away your power up until your butt's in that chair of your own bus. You've
Mm.
given away all your power. Because then, as long as you're accusing, blaming, or even verbalizing, well, it's because any fill in the blanks from there, you're not in your own ownership. You're not in your own authentic power, and your life will keep getting hit by 2x4s or that train. There are no butterflies in that place.
And I think it's important to, you know, to state and restate that, like, there isn't a right or wrong way. Like, you and I say this all the time to each other. Like, there's not a right way to live, there's not a wrong way to live. It's so important, I think, to underscore that, because I know for me, I had tremendous judgment, particularly in my 20s, when I started coming into some of this awareness, when some of these ideas like responsibility is the ability to respond, right? I remember hearing that for the first time. I must have been like 25. I was like, oh my God, like it changed my life. Just like, we're a soul having a human experience. That phrase changed my life, these moments. And I remember like having all, the light bulbs going off, and I could start reorganizing all of those stories and a lot of patterns in my life that were based on beliefs that weren't as expansive as these, that didn't take a bigger picture into consideration. It was a very small, narrow way of seeing things that I had been taught, right? That was my environment. And by which I had judged myself. But what I noticed was, when I started getting introduced to some of these ideas, there would be this expansion, but then rather soon after, there would be a contraction, because I would go into this tremendous judgment for a period of time about how I had lived my life up until then. Like, why didn't I know this already? Or why was I so judgmental about that? Or why was I such a victim in that situation? Or why didn't I do something differently? And I think it's important to add into this conversation patience and self-compassion, because what we're really doing, and you and I have been doing this work for decades. We've been having these conversations for decades. So particularly for anyone who is just sort of starting to ask some of these questions and explore some of these ideas, it's really important to remember to have a lot of self-compassion, and to be having literally somewhere in our environment this question of, how is this for me? Or even the statement of, it's all part of my life experience, so that we can stop judging the good parts of our life and the bad parts, and the way, loving how we reacted in one situation but hating how we did it in another. To me, our podcast, this conversation, every conversation that I could guarantee we're going to have from here on out is, as we said last time, an invitation and an opportunity to consider a different way of looking at things. That's it. Not a right way, not a wrong way. It's an opportunity and a question and an invitation. And I know for myself, I have to reiterate that too, because I am a judgmental being, and it is so easy for me to go into self-judgment. But when I remember that this is for my learning, it's for my healing, it's for my awakening, I can soften that a little bit. And when I do, some truth can come forward, some learning, but in the judgment, nothing can.
Right.
And it's dark.
Well, and in that softening, anytime you speak of a softening, there's an opening, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that God space coming in. It's that universe opening up, and you know there is no right or wrong. That's correct. I truly believe that, but there is a lot of suffering and pain. So if you are in suffering pain, that it's one of your big 2x4s or train or butterflies, whatever you're going to look at it, if there's suffering and pain and there's no happiness all the way up to joy with it, then if you could just like, we're going to talk about this in our next podcast that we've decided about judgment and non-judgment, because that could be 40 podcasts in one. I mean, 40 podcasts in and of itself, because that's something we still struggle with. That's something we still suffer with. And, we feel like we're a little bit along the way of waking up, and yet we still stumble and fall and skin our knees and get back up with it, maybe a little faster than what we used to, thankfully. Sometimes we just stumble and we don't have to fall and skin our knees with it, or we still get to brush our teeth without bathing in toxins. So, that's, there's no right or wrong, but there is a lot of suffering and there's a lot of pain. So one of the indicators, if you just can say, I'm in suffering, I'm in pain, I'm not in joy, I'm not really happy, what is it here to teach me? What do I need to know? What is it? And I was writing about this in my book this week or last week, and about the answers may not come in that moment you ask the question. The answers may not come that week, that month, that year. But just being softened to it, as I love how you put that, being open to it, to finding that answer, because you and I both know, as we work with our clients, we don't have their answers. Each client has, each soul, each human has their own answers. Because as much as I love you and as close to you as I am, I never have your answers. I'm just your mirror, to be in that sacred space of letting you do your work. So I love how you said the opening, the softening, the opening, because that's where the answers come in. Because when we are in judgment, or we are in right or wrong, you're right, I'm wrong, you're wrong, I'm right, that is a judgment. And there's no light that can get into that space. We block that, what we fill that space with. We're not getting the blessings through that. We're not getting the answers through that. We're not getting the peace. Above all, the peace. So I love how you put that, as far as the softening, because it really is like, when you said that, my entire body just went, oh, yeah, that.
And we so desperately, I mean, I'm not going to say everyone, but I speak for myself, and I think probably for you as well, and maybe many people listening, we want the answers. Like, we want to know. There's a desire to know. There's a lot of security and safety in knowing. And as human beings, and Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? Food, shelter, clothing, we want that safety. We want that security. But I think it's time for us to be thinking about the price that we're paying for that. And a lot of times what we think is going to create that safety and security is false, right? If I am right in a fight with my husband, I think that my brain or something in my nervous system thinks I'm going to be creating safety and security, but it's not really about that in that moment. I think, we've like misunderstood what's really going to create. What creates safety and security is this feeling of I have the ability to respond in any situation. Is that breathing into trust and faith and love, and creating that in the space between us creates safety and security, right? I mean, we're going to have this conversation probably many times. I mean, I was just on a call earlier today with some colleagues talking about this work that we do. And then this other side of it, which is how do you make money, and those sort of the whole financial, physical world reality of like getting things done in the world, and how you manifest the material safety and all of this. So it's a much more complex issue than this. But I think for the purpose of this conversation, to be able to trust that asking a question, being more in a question, being more in the unknowing than the knowing, could actually be a path, if not the path, but let's say a path to feeling more safe, more secure, more certain. Because what I think it does is it increases our capacity to connect with our own answers, to connect with our own truth, to be the driver in the bus. to have this experience where you lose your job. Yes, are you going to be unhappy you lost your job? Of course you are. You're going to curse out your boss? Probably you are. Are you going to be terrified about how you're going to pay your rent next month? For sure. If you're living month to month like the majority of Americans do. I have experienced that numerous times in my life. Like, of course it is. But in doing these practices and really considering, who is driving that experience, and deciding it is you, regardless of if it was your boss who fired you and your boss was wrong, et cetera, your boss isn't being considerate of the rent you have to pay next month. The question then doesn't just become what's the opportunity, what's the learning here, but it's how do I want to move through this experience? I have so many times, particularly when it's come to money situations, have noticed that my tendency to jump into that fear and safety and be like, what do I have to do to like figure out this situation is actually the exact opposite. It makes my life so much more difficult. The struggle to figure out that situation, it gets inflamed as opposed to, wait a minute, I need to pause. I need to consider. Don't go into scarcity, fear, judgment mode. Be with this, even for an hour. I don't know, like even maybe just for a few minutes, and like to be able to consider other possibilities and hear something from yourself that we cannot hear when we move into those other states.
Yes, because it's not going to come, it can't come through. There's no opening for it to like seep its way into your knowing, the KNOWING part, because you're knowing NO comma ING, because there's just there's no way that can be breathed upon you and you have an acknowledgement for it when we're in this judgment state, where we're in this toxic state of what we're spewing, or the scarcity state. I mean, especially in today's economy, we are either going to see it as scarcity or abundance. There's only two ways to look at it, and that's what I love about Think and Grow Rich, about Napoleon Hill, that it was written during the Depression, and then men were jumping literally out of buildings committing suicide, and then there were other men and women seeing opportunity in the same state, in the same state of the economy. So it is exactly how we look at it from within ourselves,
Mm.
and then how we're going to, I, I guess I'll say, label it right here, label it abundance, scarcity, not enough to go around. And that's what I love in this corporate culture that's coming upon us. In the 90s and early 2000s and coming up until now, it was all about competition. And what I'm seeing and sensing and feeling from what I'm seeing around the country and seeing at keynote speakers bring into corporations for their annual events, and chamber of commerces and better business bureaus bringing out, is the spirit of cooperation, which is beautiful to bring upon us as corporations wake up. I listened to a TEDx talk about how we need to bring more love into the corporate climate. And I was like, oh my God, I was like a pig in mud, just walking around in that amazingness of this guy's on stage. It's just amazing. And I'm going to find that link and I'll put it in our YouTube channel to watch that. And he talks about Southwest Airlines, which is here in Dallas, and how like they have been so profitable for the last 42, 45 years. And it's all because of how they have structured it under the term of love, right? They've got a heart on their freaking plane. So I love that as the spirit of, competition, and this competition of self and ego to spirit, and the entire competition, and how we're moving into a more beautiful, softening, opened area of cooperation, even with ourselves. Mainly, like you said, with ourselves, right? And then we're going to talk next week about being in non-judgment, not being how we're judgmental, and how to move into non-judgment, which you and I both still struggle with. constantly. It's a conscious muscle that we have to flex all the time, basically, because we are that human, judgmental, ego thinking machine, and soul is always trying to find its opening for its expansion, because that's the point on the planet, right?
That's the point. And I love you bringing that Southwest example in, because, we started this conversation talking about the space between, and they've made a conscious, intentional decision, even when probably a lot of the industry, not just the airline industry, but corporate industry in general, would laugh. I mean, I was in a Montessori school environment. I can remember about 4 or 5 years ago where a teacher was let go, and there was a real uproar in the community because this was a beloved teacher, and no one ever really got the clear picture about what was happening. But I remember, as a mediator, I was invited into a conversation about how to navigate the pain that was going on in the community, with half or three-quarters of the community wanting this teacher to stay, another half or a quarter either not wanting or wanting to support the administration and all of this. And I remembered saying, we need to make a statement, and it included love, like the word love. And I think that I was saying we need to make a statement in a Montessori early education child community. And I remember the uproar in that community, that people didn't want to use the word love. And I remember leaving that meeting and feeling so shocked. That was the place I thought love would have been okay to talk about. So for Southwest Airlines to do it, and I agree that I've heard so many people, men and women alike, speaking that language into it. And this is what we're putting in the space between us.
Exactly. That's exactly beautifully. I think we're done here.
I think we're done for today too. Thank you.
That is exactly it. And of course, if you look at that Dr. David Hawkins, the map of consciousness, love vibrates right under unconditional love, which is Jesus, Buddha, Mother Teresa. So that's the highest level of consciousness that you can be. And as souls, we are that. We can't be any more than what we already are, and we're that. We just have all these judgments and filters that come upon us that we buy into.
Yeah, and this human experience that is part of knowing the love and knowing the absence of love, and it's all good. And what are we going to choose now?
Right. Exactly.
And thank you for spending this time with me and bringing forward the love, raising the vibration of the planet, having a conscious discussion, conscious intentional discussion about the space between us. I appreciate you so much, Kathy.
I love you.
Love you too. Thanks everybody for listening. Thank you for listening to this episode of Take a Shift, a part of Mental Health News Radio Network. We are so grateful for your time and presence. Always remember, you're just one shift away from a better feeling day in your life. Until next time, remember to listen, ignite, and transform. Much love from us to you.